The 2023 AFL season is less than 50 days away, and although we can't wait for the footy to be back on again, I thought it'd be fun to take one last look back at 2022, and more specifically, my predictions for that season. At enormous highs and agonising lows scattered across the competition in so many different ways. In today's video, I'll be looking back at my 2022 AFL predictions. At the bottom of the ladder, in 18th spot, I had the Hawthorn Footy Club. Going into the season, not many people thought Hawthorn were going to be a competitive side and would officially start the first year of their rebuild under new senior coach Sam Mitchell. For a side that finished 13th, Hawthorn were an extremely competitive side, defeating teams like Geelong, Brisbane, and smashing Port Adelaide in South Australia. However, they also suffered heavy losses to St Kilda, Gold Coast, and Richmond. Things, however, don't look bright for Hawks fans in 2023, with many people predicting Hawthorn to finish at the bottom of the ladder. This comes as no surprise as they've lost serious leadership and experience at the back end of 2022. This, combined with their young and inexperienced lists, sees many punters placing Hawthorn dead last. Overall, a bad prediction on my behalf, but I was probably a year too early on this call. Coming up next in 17th spot, I had the West Coast Eagles. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong for the Eagles in 2022 did. Even going as far back as 2021, the Jack Darling COVID situation in retrospect was just the first step to what would be a horror marathon for West Coast. With several COVID issues and injuries to some of their most pivotal players, it saw an incredible situation where the West Coast team had to make 14 changes going into round 2. With most of those changes resulting in players that had to debut for West Coast despite never having met a teammate until that day. This, combined with several blowouts at their home stadium, led to one of the most agonising seasons in Eagles memory. Despite that though, West Coast somehow pulled off one of the upsets of the year, defeating Collingwood at Marvel Stadium, who would go on to miss out on a grand final by 1 point. However, that would only be their first out of 2 wins for the season, as the Eagles endured their biggest losing streak in club history. Just one of many problems that led to West Coast having arguably their worst season in AFL history. Coming in 16th spot, I had the Gold Coast Suns. My thoughts on the Suns heading into 2022 was one of two things. They would either take a massive step in the right direction or fall back down once again, resulting in 𝗦cie𝗰𝗶 being sacked. And despite being the most under pressure coach heading into the season, 𝗦cie will once again lead the Suns as senior coach in 2023. Even without their young gun Ben King, who missed the entire season due to injury, the Suns equaled their most wins in a season with 10, finishing 12th. Led by surprising key forward duo 𝗦cie 𝗰𝗶 and Levi Casbolt, who both combined for 77 goals, ranks 3rd for goals kicked by a key forward duo, behind Cameron and Hawkins and Colonel and Mackay. Despite losing Rankin in their first round selection, which would result in the Cats getting Jai Clark, Gold Coast looked primed to officially begin their first finals campaign in 2023. Coming up next in 15th spot, I had the Collingwood Footy Club. This is definitely the first really bad prediction. Thankfully though, I wasn't the only person to say Collingwood would finish in the bottom 4. To be fair though, if you were to say Collingwood would miss out on a grand final by just 1 point at the start of 2022, people would be on their knees laughing their eyes out. But with all of that being said, Collingwood somehow pulled off one of the greatest comeback stories in AFL history, rising up the ladder from 17th in 2021 to 4th in 2022, the equal highest ladder rise of any club in one season. They won 11 games in a row during the year and finished inside the top 4 and were just 1 point away from earning a spot in the grand footy whenever the black and white are out playing. Going into 2023, the Pies without a question are the wild card of the competition. They could either do even more insane things. Next up in 14th, I had North Melbourne. North Melbourne had, in my opinion at least, a terrific off-season in 2021. They recruited young players from other clubs that they needed in order to fill up their list. They stole Hugh Greenwood from the Gold Coast Suns and drafted generational talent Jason Horne-Francis with pick 1. In my mind, North were primed to move out of the bottom 4 and start building their finals profile. Instead, the Kangaroos endured statistically one of the worst years that any club has ever had in the history of the AFL. The worst team in the competition by a significant margin, and being the rightful winners of the wooden spoon. They are, to put it simply, at the moment, a broken football club, both on and off the field. Jason Horne-Francis was gone before even spending a whole year at the club. They received constant 100-point smashings, and some of their players have been undersieged by the media all year. The only good thing to come out of 2022 for North fans was the recruitment of the greatest modern day coach, Alistair Clark's, which in of itself has come with a lot of controversy. I guess the real question to come out of North's 2022 season would be, is enduring one of the worst seasons in AFL history worth gaining the greatest coach of all time? I guess we'll see the answer unfold as time plays out. In 13th spot, I had the Adelaide Crows. Adelaide are in that middle part of their rebuild where they are starting to show glimpses of what they can become while also being extremely inconsistent, as you would expect from a young side. Because of that, guessing where they would finish on the ladder was honestly quite easy, but as I said, we are starting to see what Matthew Nick's Crows can accomplish. And the Crows at this stage look primed to be the biggest risers in 2023. Bringing in Sun star Isaac Rankin, who combined with Josh Shelley, Darcy Fogarty, Shane McAdam, Riley Philthorpe and the Big Tex, could see the Crows become the most exciting and young forward line in the competition. In 12th spot, I had the Carlton Blues. 2022 was a wild season, to say the least, for the Blues. They started the season 3-0, and by the halfway point of the year, Carlton looked set to play finals for the first time since 2013. Then, despite this, Carlton, at least in my opinion, took a massive step in the right direction, with their top-end talent achieving a lot of individual success, Cripps winning the Brownlow and Curnow awarded the Coleman Medal. 2023 is, simply put, fine. Next up, on 11th, I had St Kilda, who finished one spot above in 10th. St Kilda are a weird team to talk about. They are about the most mid team in the competition, which is saying a lot considering they are by far the most inconsistent. They'll go from defeating a genuine premiership contender one week before losing to a bottom 4 team the week after. We've been watching the same team for about 4 years now, but we can't actually tell whether they are a worthy final side or not. The pieces are there, they just aren't being used in the right way. This is why the appointment of head coach Ross Lyon is perfect. Not only has Ross the Boss built a legacy of taking promising teams to the back end of September, but it's a fairy tale ending with Ross probably finishing up his coaching days where it all started. With him at the helm, we are more likely to start seeing what this Saints list can truly accomplish, and maybe see just how far they can go in 2023. In 10th spot, I had Port Adelaide, who finished one spot below in 11th. One of the boldest calls that I made at the start of the 2022 season was that Port Adelaide would not play finals. And what do you know, that's exactly what happened. The Power started the season 0-5, and from that point on, never looked a finals chance. Port did play a lot better as the season went on, but by that point, their fate was already sealed. Despite such a disappointing year for the Power, 2023 looks very, very promising. Bringing in generational talent Jason Horne-Francis alongside Junior Rioli to the club, two guys who look set to make an immediate impact. This combined with their promising young talent starting to shine through with the likes of Butters, Dersma, Todd Marshall, and All-Australian half-forward Connor Rozee, as well as keeping their experienced guns in Dixon and Boak. Expect the Power at Port to be well and truly back on this year. Coming up in 9th, the final spot outside the top 8, and I had the Richmond Tigers, who finished 7th. Despite only being 2 positions off, this was still a bad call in my opinion. I didn't expect the Tigers to make the finals at all. I thought this was going to be the year they realised that the dynasty was well and truly over. But as the Tigers do, they always keep proving otherwise. Qualifying for an elimination final against the Lions, even if they did suffer a heartbreaking defeat, Richmond had one of the most damaging forward lines in the competition, averaging a score of 98, including breaking 100 points on 11 occasions. They were ranked second for inside 50s and marks inside 50. Richmond are just a scary prospect for any team to play, and are an opposition that no one looks forward to seeing on the fixture. And what's scarier is that they have just gotten better. After recruiting Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper from GWS, expect the Tigers to once again be a serious contender in 2023. We now move on into the top 8, and in 8th spot I had the Fremantle Dockers. Not longer Cardinia Park, being the first team to beat Melbourne and popularising one of the best nicknames in the AFL, the team known as Flagmantle booked themselves a home elimination final. In 7th spot I had the Geelong Cats, who would finish at the top of the table. After the Cats lost embarrassingly in another prelim in 2021, I thought the Cats were finished. I was one to jump on the too old, too slow motto. But thanks to a new attacking mindset from Chris Scott, the Cats pulled together one of the most convincing premiership campaigns in recent memory. Recruiting delisted Crow Tyson Stengel turned out to be one of the biggest recruit steals of all time, becoming one of 5 Geelong players to make the All-Australian team. The others consisting of Jeremy Cameron, who is arguably the best player in the game right now, Tom Hawkins, who was selected as captain, Tom Stewart, arguably the best defender in the competition, and Mark Blicavs. This all combined into a premiership that sent off Cats legend Joel Selwood, but I'll get to that later. Next up, in 6th spot, I had the Sydney Swans. Honestly, it was really tough getting a read on the Swannies, because they are definitely a finals team, but at the start of the year, I couldn't place them in either just a finals contender or a genuine premiership contender, because they have arguably the most balanced list in the competition with no real weaknesses. But for me, what I thought would hold the Swans back would be their youth, but it ended up coming back to bite me, because it was their young players who led the Swans to their grand final appearance, with the likes of Chad Warner, Logan McDonald, and among others. Even though it ended up in a humiliating loss to the Cats, the fact they got to that stage in the first place is noticeable nonetheless. However, if the saying history will repeat itself is really true in the world of the AFL, the Swans should join a list of teams who have either missed or have just made the finals after being thumped in the previous grand final. Think of the likes of the 2017 Crows, the 2019 Giants, and the 2021 Bulldogs. Going into 2023, the Swans could really do anything, but there definitely should be some nervous Swannies fan after the back of a humiliating grand final loss. Next up, in 5th spot, I had the Essendon Bombers, who would finish 10 spots below it in 15th. Yeah, not much I can really say here. At the start of 2022, I was extremely confident that the Bombers would not only play finals, but potentially fight for a top 4 spot. But instead, they pulled a 180 on me and the entire competition finishing inside the bottom 4, which resulted in the club completely breaking apart. Ben Rutten was shown the door, and they had 3 CEOs in 1 month, with one at the head of the table for less than 24 hours. But they were just as poor on field as well. Despite finishing 15th, Essendon were ranked as the worst defensive team in the competition, and were heavily criticised by the media all year round, which eventually peaked with the now infamous Luke Parker mockery of Dylan Shield in round 9. All of this happened in the club's 150th anniversary season. However, even despite that being said, things do look up for the Bombers in 2023. Bringing in Anthony McDonald-Woody out of retirement, recruiting a genuine diamond in the rough in Sam Wiedemann, superstars starting to shine in Nick Martin, and another stellar draft night selecting Elijah Sadis and Lewis Hayes. But with that being said, this was still a shocking call by my half. Moving up into the top 4 now, and in 4th spot, I had the GWS Giants, who finished 16th. Wow, this is probably worse than the Essendon call if I'm being honest. Going into the season, I thought GWS were going to be either a massive hit or miss, finishing high up the ladder and competing for a flag after an unlikely successful season in 2021, or just completely break apart causing the restart button to be pushed. And it's obvious that I picked the wrong side of that story. The Giants season was actually pretty sad. They sacked Leon Cameron, who has been the longest serving GWS coach ever. They lost several stars in Jacob Hopper, Tim Taranto, and Tanner Bruin, and quite literally the only memorable thing that came out of their year was when Kelly Underwood labelled the Giants as the Orange Team, which, strangely enough, perfectly pictures just how irrelevant they have truly become, averaging the lowest attendance of any AFL club in 2022. Despite that, however, there are still stars across this list that can help GWS make a push into finals contention, with a fit in firing Toby Green, Stephen Coniglio, Lockie Whitfield, Nick Haynes, Jesse Hogan, and Phil Davis, alongside their growing young core in pick number 1 in Aaron Cadman, Lockie Aish, Tom Green, just to name a few. Adam Kingsley's Giants are capable of anything in 2023 if they get their fitness right. Moving on to third now, and I had the Western Bulldogs, who finished 8th. Despite losing the 2021 Grand Final in historic fashion, many of us, including myself, thought we would see the Dogs make another crack at a premiership. However, they were nowhere near that mark, ultimately just slipping into the 8, which was totally undeserved. It wouldn't matter though, since the Dogs would choke a 41-point lead against Freo in the elimination final. Throughout the season, the Doggies just seemed to go down again, never replicating that fierce side of 2021. And what's even worse is that the players that did stand up this year, like Josh Dunkley and maybe even Lockie Hunter, have all found new clubs. The Bulldogs did find key position talent in the trade period, recruiting Rory Lobb after a career best year for the Dockers, and brought back Liam Jones from retirement. Going into 2023, however, the Bulldogs seemed to be a side that could be a hit or miss, either once again competing for a flag or completely dropping out of the 8. Moving on to second, and I had the Brisbane Lions, who would finish 4 spots below in 6th. Another side who I thought would be at the top end of the competition. Might have been a year too early with this prediction, considering the outstanding off-season that they've had, recruiting Josh Dunkley, Jack Gunston, as well as drafting the best player in the draft, father-son midfield star Will Ashcroft. However, I'm not afraid to say that this was a pretty good prediction, since despite finishing 6th, they still made it all the way to a prelim final. But regardless, the Lions did slip drastically in the last few weeks of the home and away season to finish 6th, but had arguably the best finals run ever since rising up the ladder in 2019. With the stars they've managed to keep as well as the ones they've brought in, the Lions are every chance to win the premiership and will most likely enter the season as favourites. Finally, in top spot, I had the Melbourne Demons, who finished 1 spot below that in 2nd. A pretty good prediction overall, but I mean, most of the AFL public had Melbourne placed inside the top 2, so it's not something worth praising. Melbourne at the start of the season looked like they were going to finish first by a huge margin, of course winning their first 10 games of the season. However, due to a 3-game losing streak right afterwards, as well as losing 3 out of the last 7 games of the home and away season, meant the Cats were able to pinch top spot, with the D's slipping to 2nd. Moving on to the other awards now, and I had the Melbourne Demons tipped as my premiers. At the end of 2021, the D's looked unstoppable. They won their last 7 games in a row and dominated the second half of a grand final, smashing the Dogs to win by 74 points. And 2022 looked to be a repeat of 2021, with Melbourne winning their first 10 games before losing the next 3 to Fremantle, Sydney and Collingwood. Come finals, the Demons had just fallen to 2nd place, and then proceeded to be eliminated in straight final sets, even losing to Brisbane at the MCG, a team who last won at that venue in 2014, and a side Melbourne literally defeated 2 weeks ago. The Cats were crowned the premiers after having one of the most impressive finals campaign in recent memory. Entering the final series, they had won their last 13 games in a row, and then defeated the Pies in my opinion, the best game of the season. Then in the prelim, they smashed the Brisbane Lions by 74 points, and then in the big dance, they went one step further, utterly embarrassing the Swans by 81 points. A team who many people thought were the second best team behind the Cats. Nonetheless, the Cats claimed their 11th premiership, setting off one of the all-time greats Joel Selwood in the exact way it started. Next up is the Brownlow medal, where I had tipped 𝗦ci 𝗰𝗶𝗹. After being, quite frankly, robbed from a Brownlow medal in 2021, the Bont was just not physically capable of replicating his outstanding season in that year, with injuries plaguing the Doggies captain for majority of the season. However, 𝗰𝗶𝗹 proved in the late part of 2022 that he is still capable of playing amazing footy, with several best on ground performances and nearly single-handedly winning his side a finals game. With that being said though, the Brownlow medal was awarded to Patrick Cripps, who won the award with the last vote of the season. After Cripps' impressive pre-season and seeing that he was back to his physical best, I did have the Carlton captain as my Brownlow Smoky at the start of the season, but of course he ended up winning the medal entirely. Now moving on to the Coleman medalist, and I had Jeremy Cameron. Similar to Patrick Cripps, Jeremy Cameron was another player who I thought would have an outstanding year after a great pre-season. And although he didn't win the Coleman, Jazza ended the season as arguably the best player in the competition, finishing second for the Coleman medal with 59 goals for the home and away season, with Carlton's Charlie Curnow winning the award with 64 goals. A premiership medal, an All-Australian jacket, as well as several memes along the way. Even without a Coleman medal, Jeremy Cameron is still by far the best forward in the game. Now moving on to the final award in the Rising Star, and I had Jason Horne-Francis picked. Going into 2022, the Rising Star was going to come down to either one or two men. Either you were a Jason Horne-Francis guy, or you were a Nick Daicos guy. 2022 was extremely tough for Jason Horne-Francis, at least in his opinion. Granted, it doesn't help when your first year of AFL is for one of the worst teams in AFL history, but someone who is taken at pick number 1 is always going to start their career at a poor club. Less than 12 months after being drafted, the generational talent returned home to Port Adelaide, where he is hoping he can finally play the high level of footy that we know he is capable of. The Rising Star, however, was clearly won by Nick Daicos, who played a huge role in the Pies' miracle comeback story, having one of the best first years that arguably any player has ever had since Chris Judd. And that officially concludes this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as well as share this video around to your mates. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.